Hello, I'm Miss Emily. You startled me. I was just reading some poetry from my friend Walt Whitman. And although Walt usually writes very, very long poems, this one is very, very short. It's only 3 lines. Would you like to hear it? Before you hear it, I want you to do something for me. I want you to close your eyes and imagine, think about every word that I'm saying. The poem is called A Farm Picture, and I would love it if you would see that picture in your mind. So it goes like this. Through the ample open door of the peaceful country barn, a sunlit pasture field with cattle and horses feeding, and haze and vista, and the far horizon fading away. Just a short poem, but could you see the cows and the horses? Were you able to see the sunset as everything starts getting soft in the horizon? Everything starts turning all lavender and pink. Well, that is the thing that children saw every day. And they loved it, and they observed it just like Walt Whitman. But once in a while, they couldn't wait to get off the farm. So where did they go? Well, farms were pretty big. You couldn't just necessarily go over and see your friends. That was very far away. Your parents wouldn't necessarily be able to drive you. They had many chores to do. And the horse, and if you were lucky enough to have a buggy with that horse, those were reserved for special occasions, not for you to go over to see your friends. But there was something that you could do that your parents encouraged, and that was to go to school. Once you went to school, you would be able to learn things that your parents never did. In your home, you would be lucky if you had 1 book, maybe 2. Almost everyone had a Bible, whether it was large or small. Some of the farmers had an almanac of sorts to show when was the best time to plant their crops. But those were the only books that you were able to read. There were books, but you needed to go to the schoolhouse to get them. The school was not only a place where you learned, it was usually where you also kept your library. And people would come from the town and borrow whatever books that library in the schoolhouse had. So let's just imagine a day for a typical child in the year 1820. A child would get up and do his or her chores, whatever was required, gathering the eggs, feeding the chickens, gathering up some firewood. But once those were done, that child would go and find a little bit of food to take to school with him. Often it would be something left over from the night before, perhaps a little bit of cheese and some bread. And they would also take a little jug of cider, because although you used the water from that well for washing and taking care of things in the house and cooking, you often did not drink it. You would get sick. The water was dirty. And so you needed to drink apple cider. And children would bring it with them to school. So often you would take your lunch, and then you would kiss your parents goodbye, and you would walk. And you would walk 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles. The average child on Long Island had to walk 5 miles to a school. once you got to the school, you might see some of your friends outside, and the teacher would be standing there at the door. Very often teachers were young women, but once they got married, they weren't allowed to be a teacher anymore. And so their job was to take care of the home. You see, back in 1820, men and women had very, very different jobs, but both of them were equally important. You could not have the farm without the farmer taking care of it, and you couldn't have a home without the mother taking care of it. If the father did not have the home, how could he eat his meals? He couldn't work on the farm and then come back and cook. It took hours to cook. And so men and women had different jobs, but they were equally as important. And you as a child had your jobs too. But when you were going to school, your job was to learn. So you would go off to school and you would see your friends, but when it was time, the teacher would ring the big bell, ba-ding, 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 and you would all pile into the classroom. Now, you weren't all the same age. Children from the ages of 5 to 14 went to school, and everyone studied together in a one-room schoolhouse. Now, that sounds like it could be very, very confusing, except the teachers knew how to do this very well. What they would do is that they would start teaching perhaps some reading to the youngest children and ask the next group, older children, to start with their writing, and maybe even older children to start with their arithmetic. And then they would switch later on. To see if you had learned your lesson, you weren't required to have homework. Can you imagine? No homework. But you were required to attend your lesson in school. And you would go up to a bench that was right in front of the teacher, and it was called the recitation bench. And you would stand there and you would recite whatever lesson your teacher asked you to say to her. Now, think about this, boys and girls. You're in a classroom with everybody else, and everyone is working, and you're standing there, and now you are being asked to recite. Do you think you would get nervous? I know I would. But children very often did a good job. And the teachers were very encouraging. Did you know that Walt Whitman was a teacher? It wasn't very often that men would be teachers. Often it was young women. But once they got married, they needed to go and handle the home. And so men were teachers also. Not often, but they were there. And Walt Whitman was a teacher on Long Island. You can imagine, I'm sure, that a man who would write books and a man who would teach would value the written word very much. Most of the times, you didn't have books at home. Most of the time, you only had that Bible. So it was very special to eventually have books as you got older. And so these children who grew up in 1820, who then went through the Civil War and then were in their 50s and 60s and adults and grandparents themselves as time went on, truly cherished the books that they had. It was important for them to learn to read and learn to write. If you did not know how to do arithmetic, then how could you possibly see if you were making money on the farm? If you did not know how to read, how could you possibly know all of the different things that were out there that you could learn? there was a whole world out there that you could experience even if you never left your birthplace. Walt Whitman traveled far and wide, but he never ever forgot what it was like to be a little boy in Paumanok. And I hope that you enjoy going to school and seeing all your friends. As a matter of fact, even though you didn't have homework, you did go to school for a long time. You went to school 5 days a week, plus half a day on Saturday. And then on Sunday, you would go to Sunday school and then go to religious services for at least half the day. You were busy all the time. But you know, when you went to school, there was something that was really special, and that was recess. Oh, everyone loved to get out and run around and play. And you know what? It was only the teacher who would end recess. So if it was a beautiful day, like today is, she would tell the children that they could play a little bit longer. It was good for them. And since it's such a beautiful day, and because it's good for me, I am going to go out and walk for a while now. Maybe I'll run into Mr. Walt Whitman. I'm so glad you joined me for a while today. And do come and see us again. Bye-bye, boys and girls, and stay curious.